Hey guys, Caleb here, back again with more Red Knot. This time we have the chocolate jewel case, because you get it? It's about chocolate, and it's a jewelry case, but it's a mystery, so it's a case, a chocolate jewel case. Ha, 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 ha. By Joanna Carl, author of the Chocolate Bridal Bash, because our theme is chocolate. According to the front cover, it also comes with tasty chocolate trivia, because I have to read a book for that when I could just Google search, if I really gave two shits. Lee McKinney sells chocolates and solves crimes with punch and good humor. More, please. Carolyn Hart. To the back. Diamonds in the rough. Ha ha, ha, ha ha. We made a funny, don't you know. Lee and Joe are newlyweds, but you wouldn't know it. Joe works late, and Lee has a major crisis when the air conditioning goes out in Tin Huis Chocolate. I guess that's your chocolate shop. Which, yeah, if you sell candy, I can imagine the AC going bonkers is bad. Then the house guests from hell arrive. Lee's boy-crazy stepsister, a salesgirl from the shop, an aunt recuperating from her last divorce, of many, I'm sure, a bird-watching night owl, and an unemployed ex-con. That's 7 people with 1 bathroom. Thanks for sharing. Before the arrival of the man claiming to be Joe's father, who has been presumed dead for 30 years. In her rare free time, Lee works on the chocolate shop's newest offerings, chocolate jewels. But soon the town of Warner Pier has its very own heist, and then a body is found in the lake. Lee can't help but wonder if the crimes are related, and recognize a chance to get out of her overcrowded house. Maybe if she digs up some dirt, she'll hit the mother lode. Punny, I see you there. Yes. Praise for the chocoholic mysteries. I'm proud to stand up and say my name is Charlene, and I'm a chocoholic. Charlene Harris. You should know who that is if you like True Blood. It's like mouth-watering and stuff, a real page-turner. And I got chocolate on every one, because I'm a goofball like that, and I just don't know how to keep my hands clean or eat chocolate before it melts in my hands. What the hell? Tamar Myers. So the cover of this thing, it's a plain cover. It's a chocolate heart that says a chocoholic mystery. You get something that looks like a gaudy teenage girl accessory on the front that apparently was kept in this chocolate box. Again, it's a pun on like a jewelry case, but it's a mystery case, but it's chocolate. It's not really clever or cute. It's just kind of annoying because you could do better than this, and you're not even trying. No one is trying with the puns here. Let's talk about puns. A mystery series that I really liked is Savannah Ride by J. McKevitt. All the books have food pun titles, like Cooked Goose. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, because his goose is cooked, meaning this guy got screwed over and now he's dead. But then also that, goose is something you can eat. I forget the one about Valentine's Day, but I keep calling that Sweet Tarts, because there are sweet tarts on the cover. And when I say sweet tarts, I mean those like little candy hearts with the I love you and all that on them. The book I'm going to mention is Death by Chocolate. It's a saying commonly used, and yet the pun is not driven into the ground because in the book, the victim is an older lady who has her own TV show about like how to cook desserts and shit. I don't even think chocolate was how she died. That was just the title of the book, and she was a host of a cooking show. That was it. That was the extent of the pun, and it was fine because it wasn't done to death. So yeah, I don't have high hopes for this. Chapter 1. Just when I finally found 15 minutes for myself, the dead man came to the door. And had I not read the plot synopsis on the back, I would have been like, oh, so we're creating some foreshadowing about the victim. I mean, maybe we are. We don't know who the victim is exactly yet. Not that he looked dead. Well, I don't imagine he would if he's alive. In fact, he was lively looking. Gee! Almost like I didn't have to say anything at all. Tall and thin, with dark hair short with gray. I think there should be some commas in there, but okay. He was nicely dressed in khakis and a blue polo shirt. Only the scar on his cheek kept him from looking distinguished. Because if you have a scar anywhere on your face, no matter how awesome you are, you will never be awesome enough because of that scar. Instead, it made him look rankish. Because that's a word? Like a James Bond wannabe who might be a good guy to have on your side in a bar fight. So he doesn't look distinguished at all. He looks like some dude you'd find in the bar willing to bust a chair over your head after a couple of beers. I don't know what's with the storytelling here. And he was smiling widely enough to display canine teeth. So he's a vampire, which gave him a wolfish look. So is he distinguished, or is he just an outright creepy asshole? You can't have your cake and eat it too. A blue Ford pickup truck was parked behind him in our sandy lane. I've never heard a driveway described like this, but okay. Apparently this guy likes the color blue. It was pointed toward Lake Shore Drive, which showed he'd come around from 88th Street, driving into our semi-rural neighborhood by the back road and coming past our neighbor's house. Despite this hint that he knew the territory, the man had proved he was a stranger by coming to the front door. All our friends and relations came in through the kitchen. He showed up about 11 o'clock on a miserably hot Monday. You tell me, it is like 90 degrees out there, in the second week of July. Apparently I'm telling you this story in past tense because it happened a while ago. I wasn't all happy to hear a knock. For once, our 5 house guests were all occupied elsewhere at the same time, and I wasn't due at Tin Hoos Chocolate, where a major chocolate crisis was underway, until 1. I had been enjoying having a moment alone. I'm not going to tell you anything about this crisis because it doesn't really matter right now. I guess you should be already familiar with it if you read the back cover before you open the book. But again, you should treat every book like it's somebody's first. And so you should put a little more explanation than that in there. At the moment, I guess this works. Because you're just like, oh, there's this place. I may or may not work there. And it's called Tin Hoos Chocolate. I don't even know why. I guess we don't need an explanation for the name. Assuming there needs to be one. I mean, I would like to know, but then again, I'm guessing this is only God knows how many books in a series. Anyway, I peeked through the screen door cautiously. We rarely get salesmen, but I didn't know of anyone else who might come by without phoning ahead. Okay, when was this book? As I know it's not that old. 2007. Who the hell is getting salesmen in 2007? Sure, they'll call your house, but actually come by and try to sell you shit? The only people that ever come by are with churches, and they're wanting to preach to you the word of God. Yes? The man's grin seemed familiar, though I was sure I didn't know him. Hi, are you Mrs. Woodyard? What a shitty last name. I'm sorry for anybody who actually has that last name, but that just seemed like she grabbed 2 words and threw them together. Mrs. Joe Woodyard? Yes, I answered confidently, though I had had that title for less than 3 months. I don't suppose your husband is home? That's a statement instead of a question. I expect him home shortly. By that I meant in an hour. But I wasn't going to tell a stranger too much. Oh, should I wait, or I can come back. His schedule is indelicate. Indelicate? What does that mean? Yikes! I twisted my tongue in a knot, as usual. I mean indefinite. I'm the kind of person who will start slurring words together when I mean to say something. It happens, I think, especially to people who are dyslexic and creative, because your mind is going faster than your mouth can speak. And so that's how you get words like kern as running jokes in your immediate family. Because you decided that you were going to be talking about kernels when you finished your sentence. Then you decided, no, it would make more sense to finish your sentence with corn, and you're still talking, by the way, while you're thinking about this. And then at the last second, you decided to change it back to kernels because, no, that was probably more accurate. And instead, you get kern. So it happens, but not the way this lady is trying to say it does. His schedule is indefinite. Can I give him a message? Well, the stranger sighed deeply, then smiled again, showing those wolfish eye teeth. I guess you could tell him his father came by, he said. I remember staring at him for at least 30 seconds before I answered. I'll tell him, I said. Then I slammed the door. That was incredibly fucking rude of me. But the man on the porch was still clearly visible through the window. I knew he could see. So it's a glass door, and you just shove this shit in his face. What kind of... Oh my god, I understand there's you just get so upset you start doing dumb stuff. But I'm like, wow, how incredibly rude. And then all I can imagine for this scene is the bird story that I told a while ago with the bird and the door, and I just open it and I look at him and he's looking at me and I just shut the door and I was like, oh shit, I must have hurt that little bird. Yeah, the bird was okay, by the way. You should go listen to the story. It's probably not as interesting as I'm making it out to be. And I turned the deadbolt above the handle. Because not only am I rude as hell, I'm apparently suspicious as fuck. And I am willing to bet that no matter what, you have ill intent without knowing you for even 5 seconds. Then I slammed the door, the real solid door, not the screen door, and I turned the deadbolt above the handle. I moved away from the door, but the man on the porch was still clearly visible through the window. I knew he could see me, too, if he glanced inside. I didn't like the idea, so I went around the fireplace and stood at the bottom of the stairs. This seemed more subtle than slamming our antique casement window shut and yanking the curtains closed. Now the stranger couldn't see me lurking behind the fireplace. What is with your paranoia, man? But I couldn't see him either, and I found that I wanted to keep an eye on him. Where could I hide and watch him? What the fuck is wrong with you, lady? Hide? Why did I have the impulse to hide? I don't know. You're a screw job, apparently. The idea was absurd. Why should the idea of someone claiming to be Joe's father make me look for a closet to duck into? Are you like a super paranoid person? That's the only explanation for this. So I moved out into the living room. I didn't hide, but I did stay near the fireplace, away from the windows, where a person walking casually through the yard wouldn't be able to easily see me. If the man looked through a window, I decided I'd call the police. Why? I can understand not letting him in the house, but why would you call the cops? Also, why, unless he's just lying to you when he looked through the windows? I mean, you're pretty fucking rude. Of course, if he wanted to get into the house, I had no way of stopping him short of hitting him with the fireplace poker. I had locked the front door, but our house, built in 1904, had no air conditioning, With the temperature and the humidity both in the 90s, all the windows and doors were open, so you have no fans. I might lock the front door, but an intruder could come in at any other door or window without trouble. Also, you'd never bought a window-based air conditioner? You could get those relatively cheap, even in 2007. Mom and I found a deal and we bought 2 of them and used them to cool the apartment, before central air was a thing in our apartments. The man didn't look into the house. I heard his footsteps leaving the porch, and I heard the door of his pickup open. He was going away. I wondered what Joe would make of the visit when I told him about it. Hopefully, if he's a sensible man, he'll berate you for being dumb, and then say, I love you, but you did the dumb, honey. And when I do dumb stuff, I want you to tell me I've done dumb stuff, and then tell me I love you. He might know who the man was, I realized. He might even want to contact the guy. He just said, I'm this guy's father. And you slammed the... I'm like, he's pretty much identified himself. Whether it's true or not, we can find out later. I grabbed a pen and a piece of junk mail that happened to be lying on the office table, rushed to the front door, unlocked it, and ran outside. The truck was just pulling away, and I waved the man down. He opened the right-hand window. Not that he rolled it down, but he just opened it, and leaned across the truck seat. I tried to keep my voice non-committal. Can you leave a phone number? A faint smile crossed the man's face. Again, he seemed familiar, and suddenly I knew why. That grin, the corners of his mouth went up just like Joe's, and his eyes were the same bright blue. I caught my breath. I didn't speak. This lady is so wishy-washy. She's scared to death and paranoid 1 minute, and then she's like, oh yeah, I guess I should run out there and get his phone number, even though I'm not going to tell the reader that. I thought she was going to get his license plate until she ran out on the porch. You're terrified of this guy, but yet you're brave enough to jump out onto your porch with pen and paper in hand. The stranger put the truck in gear. I'm not sure where I'll be, he said. I'll call later. I don't have your phone number to do that, but okay. He drove away, and I stood there gaping after him. He simply couldn't be Joe's dad. Why? Why is this impossible? Only a few weeks earlier I had laid a wreath of plastic carnations on Andrew Joseph's Woodyard's grave. Joe's dad had been dead for nearly 30 years. Well, just because he's declared dead doesn't mean he is dead. I mean, was there a body in that grave to start with, or is it just ceremonial? Chapter 2. As soon as the truck had turned onto Lakeshore Drive, I dashed for the phone to call Joe. Why didn't you do that in the first place? And tell him to wait on the porch or some shit. This lady is nuts. But my plan followed the pattern of our whole summer was taking. It didn't work out. The line at Joe's boat shop was busy on my first try, and before I could hit redial, 3 of our house guests showed up. First, the white pickup with the camper pulled in and parked beside the garage. Darrell Davis got out, studiously ignoring me as I waved at him through the kitchen window. He walked around the back of the truck, shoulders slumped in his usual sullen posture, and climbed into the camper. At least Darrell had his own bed. He didn't sleep in the house, and he had a portable potty. He dumped the potty and showered at the boat shop, although he ate with us. So he wasn't exactly a house guest, a yard guest, I suppose. He got power for his lamp and his fan from our garage. Darrell was Joe's guest, if we had to choose sides. Joe had dropped out of the full-time practice of law 5 years earlier to restore antique motorboats and work part-time as a Warner Pure city attorney. But for several years, just after law school, he'd been with a legal aid type agency in Detroit. Darrell, back when he was 18, had been one of Joe's clients. He'd been accused of a home invasion, one that resulted in the death of a notorious drug dealer. Joe had been convinced Darrell was innocent of the killing, but Darrell had been convicted anyway. He'd gone to prison. Joe and some of his investigator pals had hung in there, and 5 years later another guy had confessed to the crime. Daryl was released without a stain on his character, unless you count the trauma of 5 years in prison. Yeah, that can change a person. Also, there's always going to be those assholes who were like, yeah, you did it, but I was falsely accused and falsely arrested and falsely convicted, and now I've been acquitted of a crime I didn't do. We don't give a fuck. You went to jail. You're clearly a bad person. Even if you were just accused and had to go through the trial and were acquitted, you're still going to be treated like shit. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. Joe had heard that Daryl had completed a carpentry course, but couldn't get a job. The next thing I knew, Daryl had been hired for the summer to help Joe with a remodeling project at our house, and to be an extra pair of hands at the boat shop. I'd also come up with some work we needed for Tin Huis Chocolate, installing shelves in the storeroom, and Daryl had promised to work that in. Joe couldn't afford to pay Daryl much, so meals and the parking place for his camper were part of the deal. Did I trust Joe's belief in Daryl? Yes. Did I like having a guy who had spent 5 years behind bars living in my backyard? No. Because he'd spent time in jail, or because he was living in your backyard? The 5-year-old Ford, driven by Brenda, my stepmother, pulled in and parked in the drive. Her passenger was Tracy Roderick, who had morphed into a house guest a few days earlier. Both of them were working the retail counter at Tin Huis Chocolate that summer, and Brenda was staying with us. Tracy was a guest for the rest of July, while her parents drove across Canada. The two girls got out of the car carrying shopping bags, their 18-year-old jaws spewing conversation. That's a little rude, but fair, I guess. When I'd first met Tracy, she barely turned 16, and she was mainly identified by stringy, dirty blonde hair. But during the past 2 years, Tracy had grown up. She was much more poised, and she had developed a nice figure. A good haircut and a few highlights had made her hair a shiny, tawny blonde. If Tracy had a character flaw, it was one that most of us have. She loved to gossip. I think that's true for everyone. But all in all, she had become an attractive and responsible young woman. Sure, if you say so. I was counting on that responsibility to rein in Brenda. I'd been 17 when I acquired a stepmother and a 5-year-old stepsister. Now, 13 years later, Brenda and I had never lived in the same household for more than 3 months, so we barely knew each other. We never had any opportunity or any particular reason to become more than acquaintances. Which I guess is how sometimes that works out, but you didn't even try to, get along and really know your stepmother? I would like to think if my dad had gotten remarried and I had a stepmom, I would try to be nice to her and try to get along. And I might not ever be, family, but I could see her as, friend, maybe. But Brenda, along with my dad and her mom, had come to Warner Pier when Joe and I got married 3 months earlier, and Brenda guarded the guest book at the reception. Tracy was serving cake, so the two of them met, and Tracy introduced Brenda to the college-age crowd of Warner Pier. The first result was a long-distance romance for Brenda with a guy named Will Van Clompton. The second result was Brenda's application for a summer job at Tin Huis Chocolate. It's hard to turn down. Your stepsister, not your stepmother. Why did I read stepmother? My bad. It's hard to turn your stepsister down. Brenda would be staying with us till mid-August. Although Brenda used my maiden name, McKinney, no one would take us for sisters. Well, if you don't look like sisters, then they're probably not going to think you're sisters. Brenda was around 5'4", not a nearly 6-foot giraffe like me. And she had dark hair and eyes and smooth olive complexion. Again, contrasting with the blonde hair I owe to the Tin Huis genes my mother passed on. So I guess that's your maiden name is Tin Huis. Is that like a real name? Because I just keep reading that as Tin Who is. Tenhuis. My mother passed on, and the greenish hazel eyes I got from the Texas side of my family. Her figure was curvy and cute, and she had dimples. I could see why a guy like Will, who had grown up taking West Michigan's tall Dutch blondes for granted, would be bowled over by her. Both Brenda and Tracy were wearing tank tops over shorts, tight enough to show off their fannies, because you couldn't say butts or their behinds or anything like that. Also, as a side note, they were wearing super short shorts. "Hi, Lee," Brenda said. "I found a really cute bathing suit." "Yeah," Tracy said. "Now if it'll just stay warm enough to wear it." Brenda laughed. "It's sure hot enough today. I can't believe y'all don't have air conditioning up here. And the ones who have it run it with the windows open. Who does that?" "In Michigan, we don't need air conditioning all that often," Tracy said. "At least that's what my mom says." "That's what Aunt Nettie says, too," I said. "Personally, I think you should have air conditioning even if you need it only an hour a year. But the picturesque casement windows in this house make it complicated to install window units." "How so?" "And Joe says we need a second bathroom more than we need central air." "Well, I mean, if you got like 8 people living there, then sure. I could see that. I mean, as long as you got fans, it might suck, but, you could stay hydrated and cool with a fan. Maybe next year we'll get it. Until then, we'll all swelter together." "Oh, the heat'll break soon," Tracy said. "It never lasts very long." She sounded more confident than I felt. We were moving into our 5th day of miserable heat and humidity, and the TV weather forecast wasn't hopeful. The girls went upstairs, still chattering, and I reached for the phone again. Then I heard a timid knock at the screen door. "Miss Woodyard?" Darrell always spoke softly. I could barely hear him. I opened the door. "Hi, Darrell," I said, maybe acting a little friendlier than I felt. "And please call me Lee." Darrell ducked his head. He was tall, but managed to bend his spine into a shape that took 6 inches off his height. He pulled the baseball cap off his wispy, light brown hair. The effect was that he was bowing and touching his forelock, like the under-gardener in British period novel. Then he spoke again. His voice was still soft. "Sure, Lee. Joe said to tell you he won't get home for lunch. Some guy showed up with a fancy boat he wants restored. He asked Joe to go eat with him." "Oh, that meant I'd have to wait to talk to Joe about the stranger who claimed to be his dad." "No shit!" "It's a little early for lunch, Darrell, but are you ready for a sandwich? I don't want to bother you, Miss Woodyard." "That's the deal. You help Joe, and we feed you. So if you're hungry, come on in, or you can wait until straight up noon. You're not getting anything fancy either time." "Now's fine," Darrell said. "I can wait in the camper." "Aw, come on in and talk to me. How'd your morning go?" "Okay." Darrell sidled into the house and stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. "Joe taught me to operate his paint sprayer." "Now that you can do that, you'll get stuck with a lot of spraying," I said. "That's not Joe's favorite job." I got a stack of paper plates and a handful of paper napkins and a bag of potato chips from the back hall, which we use as a pantry. The entire back hall, not like a back room or anything, just an entire back hall. Darrell moved to let me into the dining room, and I put them on the table, which we kept covered with washable vinyl. "Would you mind opening these chips, Darrell? I think we can just eat them out of the sack. I told you lunch wasn't going to be fancy." "Obviously." Darrell expertly pulled the top of the chip bag apart. Before I could turn back to the kitchen, I heard Brenda tripping downstairs. Literally, she couldn't seem to get the hang of the narrow turn of the landing. Ooh, I hope she's okay. But so far she hadn't fallen all the way down. There were a couple of soft thuds as she caught herself, then rapid thuds as she ran down the stairs. "You tripped, and then you run down the stairs." because that is smart. There was a loud thump as she reached the living room right around the corner from where Daryl and I were standing in the dining room. Before I could say anything, Brenda spoke because apparently she entered the dining room. What do you think? Are the polka dots too much? She swung into the room, putting a hand on the frame of the open French doors, because you had French doors and you neglected to tell us about this until now. Between the living and dining rooms, she pivoted into a sexy pose. What kind of sexy pose? We don't know, but it's a sexy pose. She was wearing an extremely skimpy bikini. She and Daryl saw each other at the same moment. Good job! All I heard was 2 startled gasps. Then I was alone in the dining room while Brenda's feet thudded back up the stairs and the back door slammed behind Daryl. Apparently he is so shocked by the feminine form that I don't understand why. I never gave a shit about crap like this, okay? But if you're going to buy an incredibly skimpy bikini for people to look at you, why are you freaking out when there is somebody there to look at you? Also, this poor guy is so shy that he just ran away. That poor guy. Damn, I said calmly. The summer was sure getting interesting. That's not really interesting. That's just kind of like, well, that's something to rag on you about later. I yelled out the back door, I'll call you when lunch is ready. Then I followed Brenda up the stairs. I found her in my old bedroom, which she and Tracy were sharing. Brenda was standing in the corner, her eyes the size of frisbees, while Tracy lay on the bed laughing hysterically. Brenda, if you wear that bikini at the Warner Pier Beach, I said, guys are going to look at you. Fair? That's pretty much my argument. Brenda's mouth got straight and firm. Maybe there'd be guys I wanted to look at me. Why didn't you tell me Daryl was down? How the fuck were we supposed to know you was gonna come down there nearly naked? Like, how are you supposed to, know that without somebody going, hey, I'm coming down there to show off my bikini? Maybe you shouldn't right now, unless you're comfortable with a guy looking at you. Oh my god. I thought you would hear us talking. That's a lame excuse. It's like, well, why didn't you hey, I want to try on this bikini? And I would have been like, oh, don't do that. I have a guy here unless you're cool with him looking at you. He always whispers. That's one of the creepy things about him. Tracy sat up. What's with that guy? Daryl, he's a former client of Joe's. Joe thinks he's a good worker. People around town are saying, Tracy. I deliberately made my voice sharp. When you asked if you could stay here for a month, what did I tell you? Her lips got as tight as Brenda's. No gossip. Right. And I'm going to hold you to it. Remember, I know, she went on in a sing-song voice. Large-minded people talk about ideas. Ordinary people talk about things. Small-minded people talk about other people. They're 18 now, right? So why are you lecturing them? They're adults. They can do whatever the fuck they want. I mean, I don't, not to say that they're smart now that they're adults, but they're legally adults. Yes, I said, and you're too kind a person to be small-minded. In theory. Brenda pouted. Are you going to try to improve my character too? Nope. When I told your mom you could come for summer, I said I was going to be neither a mother nor a chaperone. You're in charge of your own character. So then why are you lecturing the other person? This character is so wishy-washy. I turned toward the stairs. I'm going to get all the sandwich stuff out, but I have to be at work at 1. So I'll be leaving the dirty dishes for you two, but we're using paper plates. I'll call when everything's on the table. I paused at the door. Aunt Brenda, the swimming suit looks fine, but before you wear it to Warner Pier Beach, you might want to get a bikini wax. Burn, I guess. I plodded down the stairs, ready to get out the cheese, lunch meat, and bread, and chocolates for dessert. 10 Hirsch chocolates, which the heat was forcing me to keep in the refrigerator. which would be a logical place to keep them if you don't have AC. Aunt Nettie would be horrified. Chocolates should not be refrigerated. But when the truffles were going to melt into puddles, I didn't have much choice. The summer was becoming stranger and stranger. I guess that a ghost in a blue pickup shouldn't have surprised me. I'd already had enough surprises to last the whole season. Joe and I had looked forward to having a summer when we could concentrate on each other, on becoming a married couple. Because you weren't already a couple nor married at this point. Instead, two things had happened. Good things, in the main, but they distracted us from each other. Since I'd come to Warner Pier 2 years earlier to become business manager of my aunt's chocolate company, I'd lived with her in the 1904 house on Lakeshore Drive. The house was basically a small Midwestern farmhouse. It had been built by my great-grandfather, a furniture maker in Grand Rapids, who used it as a summer cottage for his family. When my grandfather, Henry Tenhuis, came back from World War II, he winterized the cottage to use it as a year-round home. He married my grandmother, built a service station and garage in Warner Pier, and raised my mom and my Uncle Phil in the house. He died when my mom was a senior in high school. My grandmother continued to live in the house until she died a few years earlier, and Uncle Phil and Aunt Nettie had moved in 30 years ago. I wasn't too surprised that Aunt Nettie decided I should have the house. She'd lived there for much of her married life, true, but she always described herself as a Tenhuis-in-law. I was the last actual Tenhuis descendant, she told me. I'd assumed that I'd get the property at some indefinite future time when Aunt Nettie, God forbid, couldn't live on her own. Aunt Nettie was a lively and energetic lady who was barely past 60. She wasn't even talking about retiring. I had thought of the day when she'd give up her home as far away. But when Joe and I got married, her wedding present to us was a deed to the property. We were astonished. We weren't quite so astonished to learn the reason. She was planning to remarry. For a year, Aunt Nettie had been keeping company with Warner Pier's police chief, a tall guy who looks like Abraham Lincoln. The single women of Aunt Nettie's generation considered Hogan Jones the best catch in Warner Pier. He could have taken up with women wealthier, and yes, with women more attractive, than my plump Aunt Nettie, but he'd chosen her. I considered their romance a tribute to Aunt Nettie's disposition and Hogan's insight into human nature. I expected them to be very happy. While Joe and I were in New York on our honeymoon, Aunt Nettie and Hogan slipped away and got married at the Warner County Courthouse. Then Aunt Nettie began living at Hogan's house, and she handed us the Tenhuis family property. Joe was able to get out of the lease on his apartment, and it seemed foolish not to move right into the old house, even though we'd had to act in a hurry. Aunt Nettie and Hogan were spending the month of July abroad, first on a barge cruising the rivers of Germany, and then visiting Aunt Nettie's friends in the Netherlands. Because there's nowhere he wants to go, I guess. Where she spent a year learning to make those fantastic truffles and bonbons that Tenhuis Chocolate's promotional literature describes as handmade chocolates in the European tradition. Aunt Nettie hadn't really moved out completely when she and Hogan left for Europe, so the house was still full of her furniture. Joe and I put most of our stuff, including around 100 wedding presents, in the garage. But basically we had 2 housefuls of furniture and wood until Aunt Nettie and Hogan got back and sorted things out. Joe decided that, since things were confused anyway, we might as well remodel. We would put in the upstairs bathroom Aunt Nettie had always intended to add, and while we were at it, we would extend the kitchen to add room for a dishwasher and could push the downstairs bathroom's wall out to accommodate a stall shower. Joe loves working with his hands, so my suggestion that we find a contractor was ignored. Joe hired Darryl and started digging holes for the new foundation. At least he wasn't putting a basement under the addition. Then more people who needed room and board began showing up. Joe and I were getting used to being a married couple in a situation that included a construction project and 5 house guests. But I thought you said you couldn't figure out how to be a married couple because of those said house guests. So which is it? Each house guest had a different schedule for meals and laundry, and going to bed and getting up. There were 5 vehicles. Luckily, 2 of our guests were afoot, trying to share a driveway that will hold 3 cars only if they're parked at exactly the right angle. People were raiding the refrigerator. People were wanting to watch different television programs and listen to different radio stations. Plus, we had only 1 bathroom, and that was about to lose one of its walls. And now Brenda didn't want Daryl looking at her in her new bikini. The end of the world, guys, because this one guy shouldn't look at this one woman in a very revealing bikini that if it makes her uncomfortable, then she shouldn't be wearing. I had almost decided to run away from home when I heard the clippity-clop of high heels on the stairs. Joe's Aunt Gina was coming down. I groaned. At least Daryl wasn't intrusive, and I liked Brenda and Tracy, but Gina seemed to intrude everywhere, and I didn't like her. But maybe, I thought, she'd know something about the stranger who had claimed to be Joe's father. After all, Gina was his sister. Chapter 3. I listened as Gina carefully picked her way down our wooden stairs. If she wouldn't insist on wearing high-heeled shoes, she could walk downstairs without doing that teeter-totter act, I thought angrily. And why did she have to dye her hair that awful, lifeless black? And why did she wear those skinny leggings that made her legs look like sticks? And those big, bright tunics that made her body look as round as a beach ball? And why did she pile on that clunky, junky jewelry? And why did she call me hun when I don't even like her? Because some people just use hun as a way to talk to women, even other women? And why did she knock every single drop of Christian charity out of my mind and spirit? That was random, but okay, so you hate her guts, even though you decided to call her? I had a good upbringing, mainly because of my Texas grandmother, Rose McKinney, who babysat for me most of my childhood. When I was critical of people, Grandma Rose would always say, "Have a little Christian charity, Lee. Try to understand other people's problems." So before Gina appeared in the dining room doorway, I reminded myself that Joe's aunt had a lot of problems and deserved pity, not resentment. Because I'm that big-hearted of a person. Howdy doody! I looked at her and accepted the dead black hair, the Kelly green tunic, the red beads, the long red earrings, and the glittery cardinal pinned on her shoulder. Then she spoke. "Hi, hon," and knocked every charitable thought out of my mind. What is wrong with being called hun? I don't understand this. I hope I kept my feelings out of my voice as I greeted her. "Hi, Gina. Did you finish your book?" "Yes, I did, hon. You wouldn't have time to stop at the library for me this afternoon, would you?" Why can't she go herself? "I don't leave the shop until after 9 o'clock, but I might be able to do it before I go in." "Oh, hon, I don't want to be a bother." But you are a bother, I thought. Out loud, I said, "Lunch is nearly ready." "Good." Gina started toward the back hall, where the bathroom is located. "But first I must use the..." She frowned. "Are the facilities in use?" "Not unless somebody snuck around through the bedroom." Gina went past me, and I heard the bathroom door close. I hoped she wouldn't stay in there teasing that awful hair too long. I was determined to ask her about Joe's dad's death. Well, why didn't you just skip the pleasantries and be like, "Hey, I gotta ask you a thing"? But was the information I might get worth the strain of trying to dig it out of Gina? I didn't have the slightest idea what Gina was doing in my house anyway. Then kick her the fuck out! It's not that hard. I met Gina before Joe and I were married, of course, and she brought Joe's grandmother to our wedding. Gina, short for Regina, lived in a small town in central Michigan, where she ran what was reported to be a successful antique shop. Joe's 91-year-old grandmother had an apartment in a retirement center in the same town. As her mother's only surviving child, Gina was the designated daughter, and by all reports she visited her mother several times weekly, took her on excursions, shopped for her, escorted her to the doctor's appointments, and handled all the other details of caring for an elderly parent. So this lady sounds on the up and up, you just don't like her, which isn't wrong in and of itself, but you not liking somebody just because you guys don't jive is a you problem, not really her being a dick, unless she's secretly a dick. Grandma Ida was not particularly incapable, considering her age, but she needed a family member to help her out now and then. I'd never heard Gina complain about taking responsibility for her mother, so Gina had her good points, even if she did call me hun. And again, if you have a problem with that, just be like, hey lady, I don't know what it is about this particular word, but please don't call me that. I ain't your honey, I ain't your sugar, I'm just your sister-in-law. But I couldn't understand why she was at my house instead of halfway across Michigan running her business and taking care of her mother. A week earlier, Gina had shown up and announced that she wanted to pay us a short visit. When Joe pressed her for a reason, she said she was getting a divorce. Joe said he thought it was her fifth, and her ex-husband was making things unpleasant. Damn, you've been married 5 times? Like, they don't even know how many times you've been married, but I think it was 5. She was vague about what unpleasant episodes had occurred. Gina denied that her ex had threatened or physically abused her, reasons that would have made it evident why she needed to hide out. Maybe she didn't want the divorce and she just like, you know what, I'm just gonna go away somewhere. That happens. Sometimes you just get really upset or stressed, and so you know, like, you know what, I'm just gonna get up and go do a thing that has nothing to do with all these other things until I feel better and I'm ready to come back and face my problems. Normal and healthy, because hiding out was exactly what Gina was doing. She had stashed her car someplace in Holland, and she never left the house. Not that she spent a lot of time with the rest of us. Most of the time she was upstairs, lying on the double bed that took up most of the floor space in our smallest bedroom, reading while a box fan blew the damp air over her. She had read at least 20 romance novels in the week she'd been a house guest. She came down only to use the bathroom. And to eat. Jenna never missed a meal, but she always disappeared back upstairs before it was time to do the dishes. So, instead of being concerned about her spending her entire time in that one room like she's a hermit, you're gonna bitch about the dishes and how she never does them. Have you told her, hey, it's your turn to do the dishes? There's like 5 people living here. Granted, you're using paper plates, so again, I'm not sure what you're bitching about. Brenda and Tracy called Daryl the creeper, and Gina the dinner guest. I didn't feel that I could kick Joe's aunt out. Oh, his aunt, not his sister. And I thought Joe should be responsible for quizzing her about why she was at our house. Well, okay, that's fair, since that is his family and not yours. But that's your and his house, not just his house, and you exist there. And if she's going to stay in your house, then you should know what the fuck's going on and kick her out or let her stay. That's on you, not just him. It's your guys' house. You share responsibility. But as I opened a package of Braunschweiser, is that a beer? I don't know. Maybe it's a weenie. I vowed that Gina wasn't going to escape my questions about Joe's dad. I wanted to understand who the stranger who had come to the door was, and learning about Joe's dad, even if he'd been dead for nearly 30 years, might give me a clue. As Gina drifted back into the kitchen, I pounced. Gina, tell me about Joe's dad. Why you couldn't have been that straightforward to start with, I don't know. Andy was my big brother, 10 years older than I was. Joe's grandmother had told me they were only 4 years apart. But I didn't argue. Exactly what happened to him. He was drowned. Didn't Joe tell you? Joe was only 5 when he died. He doesn't really know a lot about the circumstances, and I hated to ask his mom. Mercy Woodyard. Mercy, really? Runs an insurance agency in Warner Pier. How did Joe's dad come to drown? I asked. He was on the crew of a Great Lakes freighter. The ship sank in Lake Superior. It was very tragic. 20 men were lost. My heart sank as I considered the possibility that Joe's dad's body had never been found. Surely there was no chance that Andrew Joseph Woodyard... Wait. Hold on. Okay, so I took a moment to find the exact part in Chapter 1 that first gives us the name of Joe's dad. And Joe's dad, on page 4 at the end of Chapter 1, is Andrew Joseph Woodyard. However, here in the middle of Chapter 3, it is Andrew Joseph Woodward. I'm not sure. I'm going to assume that's a typo nobody caught. Surely there was no chance that Andrew Joseph Woodward was still alive. I tried again. Joe and I took your mother to the cemetery to put a wreath. Grandma Ida put a wreath on his grave on Memorial Day. Yes, Mom's such a darling. She keeps all the old traditions. So his body was recovered? Gina nodded. Oh, yes, hon. Mercy went up to Houghton to identify him. It was awful for her. Was there any way to be tactful about asking how the body was identified? I had to try. Had he been in the water long? Just a couple of days. Mom insisted we have an open casket service. Gina frowned. Why do you want to know all this, hon? It's not suspicious. I mean, you don't know anything about his dad other than he died, so... Now that you think about it, if you've been dating somebody, got engaged to, and then married, isn't it super weird that you wouldn't have talked about your dad? I mean, granted, you may not have remembered. Wouldn't he have heard his mom tell the stories, like his other relatives mention it to him? Should I tell her about the stranger who came to the door? No, I decided. I'd ask Joe about him first. Well, why not ask the aunt? I mean, what's she gonna do? Gasp and not tell you anything? She's already not really telling you much. I was just curious, I said. Nobody ever talks about him. Does Joe look like him? Not a lot. Andy wasn't as tall as Joe is, and his hair was lighter, medium brown, not dark like Joe's. Joe gets his dark hair from Mercy. Her hair was almost black before she decided to go blonde. But Joe's face is shaped like Andy's was, and Andy had blue eyes too. She turned toward the living room, tossing her final comment back over her shoulder. Joe's smile is a lot like Andy's. Her words made my stomach do a somersault. It was the stranger's smile that had reminded me of Joe. I forced myself to act calm. I picked up the platter of cold cuts in one hand and a bowl of lettuce in the other. I just turned toward the dining room when the phone rang. Gina was standing right beside it, and she jumped about a foot off the floor. Her face became a picture of terror. "Oh, honey," she said, "that startled me." She didn't look startled. She looked terrified. I stared at her, trying to understand why an ordinary noise like a telephone would frighten her. The phone rang again. I gestured with the cold cuts and lettuce, pointing out that my hands were full. "Would you mind getting that, Gina?" No, Lee, honey. I can't answer the phone. No one must know I'm here." "Okay. Why?" I turned around and put the cold cuts and lettuce down on the cabinet. I tried not to glare at Gina as I picked up the phone. Lee, is that you? I recognized the rather creaky voice of Joe's grandmother, so I turned toward Gina, ready to hand her the phone. Hello, Grandma Ida, how are you? Gina's reaction was so unexpected that I missed Grandma Ida's next remark. Gina shook her head vigorously. No, no, she whispered. Don't tell her I'm here. Then she ran out of the kitchen. Her high heels went up the stairs with a fast clomp clomp. I'm sorry, Grandma Ida, I said. I didn't hear what you said. Something wrong with the line, I guess. I said, have you heard from Regina? Should I lie for Gina? Or make her talk to her mother? I had less than a second to make up my mind. I took the coward's way out and asked a new question instead of answering the old one. Was she going to call us? She's gone someplace and she didn't tell me where. I was hoping she'd let someone in the family know where she is. I'm sorry, Grandma Ida. I can't help you. Do you have a product? Oh, she's fucking up words again. I mean, do you have a problem? Oh, no, Lee. Things are fine. It just made me nervous, Regina taking off like that. If you hear from her, let me know. I'll tell you anything I can, I said, hating myself some and hating Gina a lot more. How can you hate? You don't even know what the fuck is going on. If you feel anything, you should be incredibly confused and concerned. Grandma Ida and I talked a few more minutes. I told her Joe was busy but fine, and that married life was great. So far. I didn't mention that it was also crowded and completely lacking in privacy. I'm not sure my comments made much sense. I was racking my brain for an explanation of why Gina would turn her back on her life as a dutiful daughter and refuse even to talk to her mother. As soon as I hung up, I started for the stairs, but the mantel clock in the living room read 12. I groaned. I only had 40 minutes before I had to leave for tenuous chocolate, and if I was going to stop for Gina's library books, I had only 30 minutes. I plunked the cold cuts and lettuce in the middle of the table, and then grabbed a package of cookies and a box of tenuous chocolates and put them out. The group would simply have to settle for an indoor build-your-own sandwich picnic. I turned on the column fan we kept in the dining room, went to the back door and yelled, Daryl! Right into the face of our fifth house guest. Pete Falconer had appeared on the back porch like a bird suddenly swooping down from one of the 100-foot tall maples that surrounded the house. I hadn't heard his SUV pull in. I guess Pete's age was around 40, but he had thick, shiny, prematurely gray hair. The sun was making that hair glint almost white, and his shiny black eyes sent out piercing rays from either side of his generous aquiline nose. Yes, his nose looked like an eagle's beak. Add the broad shoulders and the arms always held slightly flexed from his sides, and Pete became Eagle Man. The supervillain! Eagle Man! Or I guess a superhero. It just kind of feels like we're going for a bad guy. Or I've seen too much Zorro. One of the two. He had been a perfect model for a flying superhero, in case some comic strip artist wanted to base one on the bird. Pete might not have feathers, but he always looked as if he were ready to take off into the stratosphere. Which was a silly idea, I reminded myself. A 6'5" guy carrying over 200 pounds of solid muscle would be too heavy to fly, unless he were equipped with a jet engine. All Pete had was an olive green bush hat. So, wait, huh? You had to seriously remind yourself that flight isn't a thing. But it's only not a thing because the guy is 200 pounds and wears a hat. Thus he can't fly like a normal human being. Whoops, I said. Sorry I yelled right in your face, Pete. I didn't see your comment. I mean coming. I didn't see you coming. Pete got that sly smile that my slips of the tongue always give him, and I mentally cursed myself. You're just in time for lunch, I said. Great, Pete said. He gestured toward the back hall. Is it primping time for the little ladies? The bathroom is free. He went past me, throwing off sparks of testosterone. Because he's just that manly, I guess. Like Batman and that chin of justice. Brenda and Tracy have a nickname for Pete as well. As for Daryl and Aunt Gina, to them, he's... Well, you already told us that Daryl and Gina have a nickname. To them, he is Mr. Macho. My nickname for him, one I never say out loud, is Pete the Pig. Pig as in male chauvinist pig. The way he'd ask about the girls and the bathroom was typical. He could have said, "Is the bathroom in use?" But no. He used the question to create a picture of little ladies selfishly occupying the bathroom. Or it could just been he thought it was a stupid phrase, so he said it. I could see Daryl climbing out the back of his camper, so I called upstairs to alert Brenda, Tracy, and Gina. Then I went to the table, sat down at one end, and began to make myself a sandwich. I promised this bunch food, but they'd have to do without gracious living. I don't understand what that means. Does that mean you made food, but they have to serve themselves? You already said they were going to serve themselves. The only thing gracious about the lunch I'd put on the table was the 10 Huis chocolates. 6 mocha pyramids, milky coffee interior, in a dark chocolate pyramid. 5 raspberry creams, red raspberry puree, in a white chocolate cream interior, coated in dark chocolate, and a dozen pieces of molded chocolate. I don't really care, how the chocolate is made. I understand that's the theme of the book, is, hey, she owns a chocolate shop and sells chocolates that they make. I don't really need to know that much detail of your chocolates, unless for some reason they're going to come into play as a significant plot point later in order to catch the bad guy. The molded chocolates were from Auntie Nettie's summer special. She was following the theme of jewels, and each tablet of chocolate was embellished with a representation of a piece of jewelry. A string of pearls in white chocolate, a diamond ring in milk chocolate, a dark chocolate spray of flowers representing a Victorian brooch. Each piece was wrapped in jewel-toned foil, silver, gold, ruby red, sapphire blue, or emerald green. The chocolate jewels we sold at the shop could be bought in boxes, also made of chocolate, but the ones I'd put on the table were in regular white cardboard boxes, with the Tin Huis logo on top. All these chocolates were seconds. Because of our heat wave and the shop's air conditioning problems, they developed to bloom a haze of white that strikes horror into the hearts of chocolatiers. But the taste was up to Aunt Nettie's standards, and I hadn't had to pay for them. Brenda and Tracy thumped down from upstairs. They had put on their brown shirts and khaki Bermuda shorts, the uniform for Tin Huis chocolate counter help. I was wearing my own brown shirt and khaki pants, so we looked like a chorus line. Gina managed to arrange for her path to intersect with Pete's as he entered from the kitchen. She smiled sweetly, and Pete held her chair and sat beside her. He preened, and I watched with renewed astonishment. I didn't know how Gina does it. She's somewhere past 50 years old, and her appearance is anything but sexy. Well, to you, asshole. But she still got it, whatever it is. I think you're jealous. She gives no shits, and you're just a bit of an asshole. All the men love her. She doesn't even seem to flirt. I don't get it. I especially didn't understand why she wanted to conquer Pete. Because he's a manly man? Why the fuck not? Pete and I got off on the wrong foot from the first. So like you and Gina? I meant to ask him where he and Joe had known each other, and it came out, did you meet Joe in detention? I mean Detroit. Did you know Joe when he worked in Detroit? Really, we're just rambling about random bullshit now. I'm kind of getting tired of it. The slip of the tongue had made it obvious that I thought Pete could have been, like Daryl, one of the guys Joe had represented in a criminal case. Pete had laughed at me, and I hadn't been able to say a straight sentence to him since. Being nervous makes my speech problem worse. Then I overheard there are no secrets in the 1904 house, Pete telling Joe he approved of me. But his opinion wasn't exactly a compliment. That first gal you married, she had brains, Pete said. This one's gonna believe any damn thing you tell her. Don't let Lee fool you, Joe said. She doesn't miss anything. Hey, it's okay, Pete said. Every man should marry once for love and once for money. Brains are a side issue. Yeah, that's kind of dick. At least he was giving me credit being Joe's love interest. Joe's first wife was one with money, but I had disliked Pete from then on. Okay, that's fair. That's a fair reason not to like the man. Daryl came in last, stopping in the dining room doorway and looking around uneasily. I'll just make a sandwich and take it out to the truck, he said. Gina patted the chair on the other side of her. Now, Daryl, you join us. Yeah, Daryl, Pete said. Don't leave me at the mercy of all these pretty girls. Brenda and Tracy giggled, and Pete winked at them. They giggled harder. Daryl sat down on the other end of the table and gave a secretive smile. You can handle him, Pete, he said. He was right. Pete was the most dangerous kind of male chauvinist pig. The kind women love. Again, how do you know he's chauvinist? He said a dick thing about you and that... Okay. The testosterone I'd caught a whiff of as he went through the kitchen oozed from his pores. I didn't know you could smell testosterone. I thought that was just our hormone that helped men grow balls and facial hair. He didn't fit the cliched picture of a bird watcher, but a bird watcher was what Pete claimed to be, and what Joe swore he actually was. Pete had shown up 2 days after Gina had, telling Joe he'd just dropped by to say hi and to meet me. He'd been planning to stay near Warner Pier for a week, camping and watching birds, he said. But his camping place had proved to be closed, so he was going back to Detroit. Before I could say, but we've already got a house full of people, Joe had said he could stay with us, as long as he didn't mind tossing his sleeping bag on our screened-in porch. When I got Joe home, I quizzed him about who Pete was, and what he was doing in our house. But Joe had proved uncommunicative. In fact, for the past week I'd barely seen Joe. He was working late at the boat shop, or he had to make a quick trip to Lansing on city business. Or he'd even spent an evening closeted with his mother on some vague family matter neither of them would talk about. Finding time alone with him hadn't been easy, especially when I was doing a lot more cooking than usual. Plus the shopping and planning required to feed 7 people 3 meals a day. You know, they could go buy their own shit with their own money. I savagely cut my sandwich in half, pretending the slice of Braunschweiger on it was a hunk of Joe's hide, and watched as Gina wrapped Pete around her finger and Pete wrapped Gina around his. They were a perfect match, a woman who was a man magnet and a man women slobbered over. The wonder was that they hadn't hated each other on sight. Gina was asking Pete about his morning bird watching. He replied by producing a digital camera and showing her a picture of an owl. After she oohed and awed, he passed the camera around to the rest of us, and yes, the picture of a great horned owl taking off from a red-tiled roof was impressive. Except to this lady. Gina moved closer and closer to him, and I got madder and madder. Gina was an independent woman who ran her own business. Why didn't she see Pete the way I did? Maybe because he hasn't been an asshole to her, but she's also been shut up in a room, so... As the classic male chauvinist, you've thrown this word around 3 times, but I've yet to really see anything that strikes me as a chauvinist pig. A dick! Yes. A bit of an asshole. Yeah. But that could also just be his way of shooting the shit and not realizing he's being an asshole. I realized that Pete and Gina were the only 2 people having a conversation. Daryl was looking miserable. We'd forced him to join us. No, Gina said, hey, come sit and hang out. Nobody else did anything. And he agreed to it when he could have just been like, nah, I'm gonna go eat my trailer. We'd forced him to join us at the lunch table, but none of us was talking to him. Daryl, I said, Joe says you're really good at carpentry, and you know that's a skill he values highly. How did you learn that? Then I was afraid I'd ask a tactless question. What if Daryl had learned carpentry in prison? But he answered in his barely audible voice, high school VOTEC. I had a good teacher. I'm assuming this means high school vocational tech, which was kind of like what my high school did, because you had your go straight into the workforce or go straight to college. So basically you had a vocational line or a college line. I mean, it really just depended on which one you wanted to go into. It didn't really matter. There wasn't much of a difference except for language studies. A few more questions about the teacher and the class projects, and Daryl opened up a bit. I could actually hear his voice. Tracy and Brenda talked a little about VOTEC classes in their high schools. Brenda had taken Vika, I learned, whatever that means. Pete and Gina stopped talking only to each other. Pete threw in a funny memory from his own high school shop class. After 20 minutes of conversation, half a sandwich and a handful of chips, and one mocha pyramid, I looked at my watch. I've got to run, I said. Gina, if I stop at the library, do you want more of the same? Gina loved the innocent romances. So the Amish ones? I thought they were all alike and all nauseating. Each to his own taste, as the old lady said when she kissed the cow. That was another of my grandmother's sayings. Oh, thanks, hon. Gina jumped to her feet. I'll get the books that are ready to go back. I'll just check the mail, I said, then I'm leaving. Tracy, Brenda, you're putting up the leftovers and doing dishes, right? And Joe's responsible for dinner. The girls nodded, mouths full. I went out the front door and down the sandy drive to the mailbox. I gathered up a handful of junk mail and was looking it over as I came back. When I reached the front walk, I realized that Pete was in the screened-in section of the porch, the section where his sleeping bag and his canvas carryall were stowed, kneeling beside his belongings. I stepped onto the porch, still looking at the mail in my hand. The Democratic National Committee? How did I get on that mailing list? I studied the envelope. Then I looked up. I found myself staring into the screened-in porch, my eyes focused on whatever Pete was doing with his carryall. It took me a second to realize he was tucking a pistol inside. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all 3 chapters of this book. The book is okay. I wouldn't say it's like super great or amazing. But I think it would make for a quick read. You know, just read them if I didn't have much else to do. I probably would pick up other books in the series. The book is funny in places, but I don't think it's intentional. It's just the character does stupid stuff that's just like, why would you do that? That's bizarre. Her speaking quirk, I don't really find that interesting or endearing or necessary. I don't know of any language quirks that are actually like that, where you substitute maybe a similar word that doesn't really make sense, but Detroit does not sound like there's a D-E-T in there, but again, a detention is not the same thing as Detroit. Those are completely 2 different words. Now, I could understand this better as if they were describing the main character thinking about one word, but then thinking about a different word that might be a better use in that situation, and then by the time she gets there, she slurred both of those words together. I think that would be a better explanation and use of a quirk than simply having her say a word and then being like, I mean this word instead. Outside of those 2 things, the other thing I took issue with, randomly labeling people as assholes, but not really giving them a reason to be an asshole, like not showing them being kind of a dick. Like, the first introduction with Pete is she describes him like a predatory bird. And I said supervillain, but in the very next line, she describes him as like a superhero. Which would imply, while she may have described him like a predatory bird, aka a villain, she actually wants to paint the mind of somebody like Superman or Batman. But then proceeds to say, yeah, he's very, very old-fashioned, his ideas about women, to the point where he thinks very little of them, as if he was a chauvinist pig. And then we say he's a chauvinist pig 3 different times in the book, to reiterate and get you clued into, he's a chauvinist pig. But he made one comment about people in the bathroom, and that was it. I don't see anything questionable here outside of the fact that she described him like a villain and then retconned that and then proceeded to call him a villain again. The same thing with Gina. She's just treating her like she's a waste of time and space and she hates her guts. And I'm not really sure why. Again, I understand that sometimes you just meet people and there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with them. You just don't jive. You just don't get along. You know, that's nature, that's people. You know, sometimes personalities and interests clash, and it doesn't matter how much you might want to fuse them together into a bond, it's just not going to happen. And so you stay separated as people who just don't like each other. But her, like, she has no concern or interest past literal hate and annoyance. Mostly hate. She outright says she hates this person. Gina hasn't been a dick. It just seems like we don't like her and she's an asshole because we say so. There's nothing here that would tell me Gina is up to no good. Something is going on with her and she's terrified and hiding out in the house, refusing to go outside. But that seems more like, hey, we should, like, try to talk to her about what's happening, get her to open up about why she's so upset that she didn't even tell her mother, who she's so close to. We have 2 characters that we don't really know if they're truly shady or not. We have one character, Daryl, who she outright says, like, does she believe in her husband's belief that the man's a good man? Yeah. But at the same time, she's like, do I like somebody who's been to prison in my backyard? Hell no. And I'm thinking, if you believe in your husband's belief that this man is a good man, then where's your problem with that he's been in prison? There's lots of people who've been to jail and they go on to be great people. Like, you get too drunk and piss in public and the cops are like, yeah, you're going to spend the night in detention. And that's where do you think you go? You have that morning where you wake up and go, oh shit, I fucked up. It happens. And then you have people who've never been to prison and they're the shittiest scumlords on the face of the planet. I don't think the author really knows what to do with these 3 characters. Like, I think she wants to set something up, set up some history between them. But it doesn't really make sense. I mean, yeah, Pete was an asshole behind her back. And so I can understand maybe more the animosity she feels for Gina, she feels for Pete. Like, if you had flip-flopped those, I think that would make a lot more sense. And that you don't like Gina because she's not really doing anything, she's just staying in a room. And she won't tell you the hows or why. But anyway, I believe that's all I have to say about this book for now. I'm Caleb, and this has been Red Knot. Thank you for listening. Bye!